The turkey was perfectly golden, the cranberry sauce glistened in its crystal bowl, and the tension at my parents' Thanksgiving table was thick enough to cut with the carving knife Dad wielded like a judge's gavel. "Sarah, could you pass the stuffing?" Mom asked, her voice carrying that particular edge of disappointment she'd perfected over the past 5 years. I handed her the dish, noting how she accepted it with the resigned air of someone doing me a favor by including me in family dinner. Around the table, my brother Marcus and his wife Jennifer exchanged knowing glances while their twin daughters played on tablets. Early rewards for good behavior, apparently. "So, Sarah," Uncle Tom said with forced cheerfulness, "still working from home?" "I work from several locations," I replied, spooning sweet potatoes onto my plate. "But yes, often from home." Dad made a sound somewhere between a snort and a sigh. "Working? That's generous." "Dan, please," Mom said but without conviction. "What?" Dad set down the carving knife with more force than necessary. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. 5 years ago, Sarah quit a perfectly good job at Morrison & Associates to start some website. 5 years later, she's still at home in her pajamas doing God knows what on a computer." "I don't wear pajamas to work," I said mildly. "That's what you focus on." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his real estate broker confidence filling the space. "Dad's got a point, Sarah. You're 34 years old. Most people have established careers by now. Hell, I made partner at my firm 2 years ago." "We know, Marcus," I said. "You mention it frequently." Jennifer jumped in, her voice syrupy with concern. "We just worry about your future, Sarah. What about retirement? Healthcare? What happens when Mom and Dad aren't around to support you?" "I pay for my own health care," I said quietly. "And I'm not living off Mom and Dad." "But you're not exactly thriving either," Mom said, reaching for her wine glass. "Mrs. Henderson asked me last week what you were doing these days. I had to tell her you were between opportunities." I was mortified. "I'm not between opportunities. I have a company." "A company," Dad repeated, loading the word with skepticism. "With employees? An office? Revenue? Or is it just you in your apartment doing your little online thing?" The phrase hung in the air, little online thing. The dismissive label they'd assigned to my work years ago when explanation became pointless. "We're just concerned," Aunt Marie said gently. "You were such a bright girl. Stanford MBA, top of your class. You could have done anything. And instead she's wasting her potential," Marcus finished. "Look, I get wanting work-life balance, but you took it too far. You've basically opted out of adulting." The twins giggled at their tablets, oblivious to the intervention disguised as holiday dinner. I cut my turkey into precise pieces, letting the familiar criticism wash over me like background noise. "I brought pie," I offered. "Of course you did," Mom said. "You always contribute food. What you don't contribute is anything we can actually tell people about. Do you know how hard it is to explain to our friends that our daughter with an MBA from Stanford is, what? A hobbyist?" "I'm not a hobbyist." "Then what are you?" Dad demanded. "Specifically, use your fancy business school vocabulary and explain to us what exactly you do that keeps you holed up in that apartment 16 hours a day." "I run a software company that develops." "Software," Marcus interrupted with a laugh. "Everyone with a laptop thinks they're running a software company. Do you have actual clients? Paying clients?" "Yes." "How many?" I took a sip of water. "Several." "Several." Jennifer's sympathy had sharpened into something closer to judgment. "Marcus has 300 clients. That's a real business. Several is a hobby." Uncle Tom tried to lighten the mood. "Maybe we should talk about something else. Sarah, did you catch the game last week?" "I don't follow football." "Of course you don't," Dad muttered. "Too busy with your computers." Cousin Jake wandered in from the living room where he'd been watching the game with the other younger cousins. At 26, fresh from business school himself, he'd recently started at a consulting firm and spoke about it with the zealous enthusiasm of the newly converted to corporate life. "Aunt Sarah," he said, settling into an empty chair, "my firm is hiring. I could probably get you an interview. It's entry-level, but with your experience, well, your old experience, you might be able to start at associate level." "That's thoughtful, Jake, but I'm not looking for positions." "Because you're committed to your current path?" he asked, his tone suggesting he knew the answer. Because I already have a position. Doing your little online thing, Dad repeated as if the phrase itself was evidence of my failure. Marcus leaned forward, switching to his concerned big brother voice. Sarah, I'm going to be real with you. You're not getting younger. The longer you stay out of the real job market, the harder it'll be to get back in. Your resume has a 5-year gap now. That's a red flag to any serious employer. I don't have a gap. I've been working. But not in any verifiable way, Jennifer added. No references from supervisors, no clear career progression. Just this vague, I run a software company claim that nobody can actually validate. Oh, for heaven's sake. Mom set down her fork with a clatter. Can we please just be honest? Sarah, you're unemployed. You have been for 5 years. We love you, but we're not going to keep pretending this is a career. It's time to grow up and rejoin the real world. The table fell silent. Even the twins looked up from their tablets, sensing the shift in energy. I am in the real world, I said quietly. Just not the one you recognize. That's called delusion, Marcus said. When your version of reality doesn't match actual reality, that's a problem. Do you pay taxes on this company? Dad asked suddenly. Yes. How much? Ballpark. I met his eyes. I'd rather not discuss my finances at Thanksgiving dinner. Because there's nothing to discuss, he concluded. Sarah, I'm your father. I want what's best for you. And what's best for you is stability. A real job. Benefits. A 401k. Maybe meet someone, settle down. Not this. Whatever this is. I'm settled. You're stagnant, Mom corrected. There's a difference. Aunt Marie tried again. What about volunteering? Even if you don't want a traditional job, you could do something meaningful. Habitat for Humanity literacy programs. I do meaningful work, I interrupted, keeping my voice level despite the tightness in my chest. But what is it? Jennifer pressed. Specifically, what do you actually do? I develop artificial intelligence solutions for healthcare systems. The table stared at me. You develop. Marcus laughed. AI for healthcare. So you're saying you compete with IBM and Google and Microsoft? In certain niches, yes. The laughter spread around the table. Not cruel but patronizing, the kind reserved for children who claim they'll be astronauts. Sweetie, Mom said, her voice dripping with gentle condescension, those are billion-dollar companies with thousands of employees. You're one person in an apartment. That's not competition. That's fantasy. Yeah, Aunt Sarah, Jake added, pulling out his phone. I took a class on AI in business school. The barrier to entry alone requires massive capital investment and specialized talent. Unless you've got a few million in funding and a team of PhDs, you're not actually in that market. I have both, I said simply. Dad shook his head. Now you're just making things up. Where would you get funding? Who would invest in someone with no track record? I had a track record. 5 years ago at Morrison & Associates, I was the lead analyst on 3 successful tech acquisitions. The investors I pitched remembered that work. But you left Morrison, Marcus pointed out. You walked away from that credibility. I walked away to build something. But what? Mom's frustration was boiling over now. What did you build? Show us. Prove to us this isn't just some elaborate excuse for unemployment. Before I could respond, Jennifer jumped in. You know what this sounds like? Those people who join MLMs and call themselves entrepreneurs. They're technically running a business, but really they're just losing money and alienating friends. I'm not in multi-level marketing. But you're doing something just as disconnected from reality, Dad said. Sarah, I'm going to be brutally honest because someone needs to be. You're embarrassing this family. Mrs. Henderson isn't the only one asking questions. Everyone wants to know what happened to the brilliant Stanford girl. And all I can tell them is that you're at home playing on computers. My work isn't play. Then show us. Mom's voice cracked. Show us something real. A paycheck stub. A client letter. An office. Anything that proves this isn't just an elaborate avoidance of adult responsibility. The room went quiet except for the football game playing in the background and the soft chimes from the twins' tablets. Uncle Tom cleared his throat. Maybe we should have pie. No, Dad interrupted. This has been building for 5 years. We've been patient. We've been supportive. We've smiled and nodded while Sarah threw away her future. But patience has limits. He turned to me, his face hard with disappointment. I'm your father. I paid for Stanford. I believed in you. And this is what you did with that investment. You became a recluse who makes up stories about competing with Google. I don't compete with Google directly. We operate in specialized verticals. Stop, Marcus said. Just stop with the jargon. If you really had a successful company, we'd know about it. There'd be evidence. Press coverage. Something. There's press coverage. Jennifer laughed. Where? Some tech blog with 50 readers. Various publications, I said carefully. Name one, Jake challenged, his phone ready. Give me one publication that's covered your company, and I'll look it up right now. I hesitated, knowing where this would lead but unable to avoid it without seeming evasive. Forbes has covered us several times. The table erupted in laughter. Genuine full-belly laughter that made the twins look up in confusion. Forbes, Marcus gasped between laughs. Oh, that's perfect. Forbes has covered your company. Right. And I'm sure Fortune 500 just called about putting you on their list. This is sad now, Jennifer said, her laughter fading into pity. Sarah, do you actually believe these delusions? Have you considered talking to someone? A therapist maybe? Mom's eyes filled with tears. My daughter needs therapy because I failed her somehow. Because I didn't push hard enough for her to stay grounded in reality. This isn't your fault, Aunt Marie assured her. Sometimes people just lose their way. I haven't lost anything, I said quietly, but no one was listening. Dad stood up, his chair scraping against the hardwood. I can't do this anymore. I can't sit here and pretend this is okay. Sir, you need help. Professional help. And until you're willing to admit you have a problem, I don't think these family dinners are productive. Dan, don't, Mom started. No, Sarah needs consequences. She needs to understand that this behavior isn't acceptable. We've enabled her for too long. Jake had been scrolling through his phone during the exchange. Suddenly his face went pale. He looked up at me, then down at his phone, then back at me, his expression transforming from confusion to shock. He said, his voice strange. Aunt Sarah, is your last name still Henderson from your marriage, or did you go back to Morrison? I kept Henderson, I replied. Why? And your company, it's called MedAI Solutions? The table went quiet at his tone. Yes, I confirmed. Jake's hands were shaking slightly as he held up his phone. And, this is you? He turned the screen toward the table. There, in high resolution, was my face on the cover of Forbes magazine. Not a small feature buried in the business section. The cover. The actual cover. The headline read, Sarah Henderson, the 34-year-old CEO who revolutionized healthcare AI. Below that, in smaller text, how one woman's algorithm is saving 10,000 lives per day. And at the top, in the magazine's signature red banner, CEO of the Year. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Jake scrolled down with a shaking finger, reading aloud from the article. Sarah Henderson, founder and CEO of MedAI Solutions, has achieved what industry giants like IBM and Google have been attempting for over a decade. A truly effective AI diagnostic system that works across socioeconomic barriers and healthcare systems. His voice cracked slightly. Her company, founded 5 years ago with $22 million in venture capital. $22 million? Marcus interrupted weakly. Jake continued reading, his voice gaining strength from shock. Has grown to a valuation of $3.8 billion as of Q3 this year. With over 400 employees across 3 continents, MedAI Solutions has become the fastest-growing healthcare technology company in the world. He scrolled further. Henderson's diagnostic algorithm, which she developed during her time at Morrison & Associates but refined after founding MedAI, has been implemented in over 2,000 hospitals worldwide. The system catches early-stage diseases that human doctors miss, reducing misdiagnosis rates by 47% and catching critical conditions an average of 6 months earlier than traditional methods. The only sound was Jake's voice and the distant football game. The impact has been particularly significant in underserved communities, he read. Henderson insisted on a pricing model that makes the technology available to rural and low-income healthcare facilities at minimal cost, subsidized by premium rates for major hospital systems. This approach has brought cutting-edge diagnostic capability to regions that previously had limited access to specialist care. He looked up, his eyes wide. There's more. A lot more. About the funding rounds, the technology, the partnerships with the World Health Organization. Let me see that, Dad said roughly, grabbing for Jake's phone. Jake pulled up more results, his voice almost frantic now. She's not just on Forbes. She's everywhere. Wall Street Journal called her the most significant healthcare innovator of the decade. Time magazine interviewed her. The New York Times did a profile. She was on CNBC's Disruptors list. She keynoted the Global Health Summit. Mom snatched her own phone with trembling hands. Within seconds her face had gone white. There's a video, she whispered. From TED. It has 12 million views. She pressed play. My voice filled the room, professional and clear, explaining in layman's terms how the diagnostic algorithm worked. The camera showed me on the famous red circle stage, completely at ease, gesturing to slides that illustrated patient outcomes. Our goal isn't to replace doctors, VideoMe was saying. It's to give them a tool that catches what human attention might miss. A second set of eyes that never gets tired, never has a bad day, never brings unconscious bias to diagnosis. The video continued. We've caught over 3,000 early-stage cancers that would have been missed for months. We've identified heart conditions, rare diseases, neurological issues. All because our system looks at data patterns that human brains aren't wired to see. The TED audience applauded. VideoMe smiled slightly, uncomfortably, clearly not enjoying the attention but enduring it for the message. The technology is only as good as its accessibility, VideoMe continued. That's why 60% of our implementations are in areas that previously had limited diagnostic resources. Because the kid in rural Arkansas deserves the same chance to catch leukemia early as the executive in Manhattan. The applause grew thunderous. The video ended. The Thanksgiving table remained silent. Jennifer broke first, her voice barely audible. You've saved. The article says 10,000 lives per day? That's the estimated impact across all implementations, I said quietly. It's extrapolated from diagnosis data and outcome projections. The actual number is hard to verify precisely, but statistically. 10,000 lives, Mom interrupted, her phone still showing my TED Talk. Per day. Uncle Tom had found another article. Forbes estimates her personal net worth at $1.2 billion. Billion. With AB. She's on the Bloomberg Billionaires Index, Jake added, scrolling frantically. Number 847 worldwide, but the youngest self-made female billionaire in healthcare technology. Marcus looked like he'd been punched. The article says you turned down acquisition offers from Google and Microsoft that would have made you the largest tech exit of the decade. The offers would have changed our mission structure, I explained. The accessibility model only works if we maintain independence from shareholders who prioritize profit over reach. You turned down. Marcus couldn't finish the sentence. Dad was reading now, his face cycling through emotions too quickly to track. You have 400 employees. 417 as of last week, I corrected. We just opened the Singapore office. You have offices. Mom's voice was hollow. Multiple offices. On continents. 3 continents currently. We're considering South America next year if the regulatory frameworks align. Aunt Marie had been silent, but now she spoke, her voice shaking. Sarah, I told you to volunteer. I suggested Habitat for Humanity. I remember. You're saving 10,000 lives per day and I suggested you volunteer. To be fair, Habitat does important work. Stop, Jennifer interrupted. Just stop being gracious about this. We were horrible to you. You were operating on the information you had, I said simply. We didn't ask for information. Mom's tears were flowing freely now. You tried to tell us and we didn't listen. You said you ran a software company and we laughed. You said you worked in healthcare AI, Marcus added, his face ashen. I literally laughed at you. I said you were competing with Google. You are competing with Google, Jake said, his voice awed. And you're winning. Dad had put down his phone, his hands covering his face. When he spoke, his voice was muffled. I called it your little online thing. The phrase hung in the air, devastating in its new context. I said you were embarrassing the family, he continued, still not looking up. That you were throwing away your Stanford education. That you needed to grow up. You were concerned, I said gently. Parents worry. Concerned. He finally looked up, his eyes red. Sarah, I told you that patience has limits. I was going to ask you to stop coming to family dinners until you got your act together. The table absorbed this. I developed an algorithm that identifies cancer, I said quietly. It's caught 3,000 cases early. That's 3,000 people who are alive because of math I wrote. And you were going to disinvite me from Thanksgiving because you thought I was unemployed. Mom made a sound between a sob and a gasp. Jake was still scrolling as if he couldn't stop. The WHO partnership. You're providing your technology to developing nations for free? For minimal implementation costs, I corrected. They pay for hardware and training. The software licensing is subsidized by our premium clients. You're providing billion-dollar technology to poor countries essentially for free, he clarified. It's the right thing to do. Disease doesn't care about economics. The Forbes article says you personally donate 80% of your salary to fund these implementations, Uncle Tom read. You're a billionaire who lives like someone in an apartment working on computers, I finished. Because the money isn't the point. The impact is the point. Jennifer was scrolling through photos now. Images of me at the Global Health Summit, shaking hands with the Director General of the WHO, speaking at medical conferences, touring hospital implementations in rural India. You met the UN Secretary General, she said numbly. Twice. The first meeting was about expanding implementation in conflict zones. The second was about. You're on a first-name basis with the Secretary General of the United Nations, Jennifer interrupted, and I told you to get a real job. You have a real job, I said. Marketing director at Marcus's firm. That's real work. Don't, Marcus said harshly. Don't be kind about this. We don't deserve kindness. You're my family. I love you. We called you delusional, he said. I said you needed therapy for your delusions. And you're CEO of the year. You're revolutionizing medicine. You're saving tens of thousands of lives. Aunt Marie was crying openly now. When you said Forbes covered you, we laughed. We actually laughed. It was an understandable response given your frame of reference, I said. Stop being so damn understanding. Mom's voice was sharp with self-directed anger. We were cruel. We were dismissive. We didn't just misunderstand, we didn't even try to understand. You told us what you were doing and we decided it wasn't worth our attention. The twins had abandoned their tablets, watching the adults with wide, confused eyes. One of them tugged Jennifer's sleeve. Mommy, why is everyone crying? Jennifer pulled her daughter close, her own tears falling. Because we made a big mistake, baby. A really big mistake. Dad stood abruptly, walking to the window. His shoulders shook. After a moment, Mom joined him and they stood together, not touching, both staring out at the November afternoon. Jake was still scrolling, his voice almost frantic with the need to catalog his discoveries. You have patents. 17 patents on diagnostic algorithms and healthcare AI implementation. You've published papers in JAMA and the New England Journal of Medicine. You're cited by researchers worldwide. The academic work helps validate the technology to skeptical medical boards, I explained. You're 34 years old, he said wonderingly. I'm 26 and I thought I was successful because I got hired at a consulting firm. You're 34 and you've changed medicine. You are successful, Jake. Everyone's path is different. Don't patronize me, he said but gently. I can't. I don't even know how to process this. I offered you an entry-level job. You could buy the company I work for with your quarterly earnings. I'm not interested in acquiring consulting firms. He laughed, a slightly hysterical edge to it. Of course you're not. You're interested in saving lives. While I'm helping rich companies get richer, you're making sure kids in rural Arkansas can catch cancer early. Uncle Tom set down his phone carefully. Sarah, I need to apologize. Not just for tonight. For 5 years. Every family gathering, every time someone asked about you and I went along with the Sarah's still figuring things out narrative. I didn't defend you. I didn't ask questions. I just assumed the worst and moved on. You weren't wrong to rely on observable evidence, I said. You saw someone working from home with no obvious markers of success. Your conclusions were logical. But they were wrong, Aunt Marie said. Completely, devastatingly wrong. Marcus had his head in his hands. I told you that you were stagnant. That you'd opted out of adulting. And you were building a company that's valued at more than most Fortune 500 corporations. Valuation is speculative, I said. Based on growth projections and market conditions. The actual value is in the implementations and outcomes. Stop doing that, Jennifer said. Stop deflecting your success. You're allowed to acknowledge what you've accomplished. I acknowledge the work, I replied. The recognition is secondary. Dad turned from the window, his face ravaged. Why didn't you correct us? All these years, all the dismissive comments, all the interventions disguised as holiday dinners. Why did you let us think you were failing? Because correcting you would have required explaining, and explaining would have required you to listen. You weren't listening. You'd already decided what my story was. You could have shown us, Mom protested. An article, an award, something. I tried, Mom. 3 years ago I mentioned the Series B funding round at Christmas dinner. You changed the subject to Marcus's new house. 2 years ago I brought up the Who partnership at Easter. Dad said it was nice I had hobbies. Last Thanksgiving I mentioned the CNBC interview. Jessica asked if I was at least making enough to pay rent. The specifics landed like physical blows. You tried to tell us, Marcus said slowly. Multiple times. And we shut you down every time. You weren't interested in details that didn't fit your narrative, I said simply. I was the family disappointment. That role served various purposes for different people. Changing it would have required effort nobody wanted to make. That's not true, Mom started. It is true, I interrupted gently. Jessica needed me to be less successful so she could be the accomplished daughter. Marcus needed me to be the cautionary tale to justify his choices. Dad needed me to be the failure to validate his beliefs about proper careers. Mom needed me to be the problem to focus on instead of her own dissatisfactions. The silence was absolute. That's not fair, Dad said weakly. It's completely fair. I'm not angry about it. I'm just stating what was obvious to anyone paying attention. My role in this family was to be the person who screwed up. When I wouldn't cooperate by actually screwing up, you decided to believe I had anyway. Jennifer was reading another article, her voice shaking. There's a profile in Fortune from 6 months ago. They interviewed your employees. Every single person said you're the best leader they've ever worked for. One woman said you personally paid for her mother's cancer treatment when insurance denied the claim. That's not relevant to the discussion, I said. It's completely relevant. Jennifer's voice rose. We thought you were a selfish recluse who'd opted out of society. You're the opposite. You're so focused on helping others that you don't even acknowledge your own accomplishments. Jake had found video of a panel discussion. This is from the World Economic Forum. The one Dad said was for people who talk about solving problems instead of solving them. I didn't attend that one, I said quickly. They invited me to speak, but I had implementation deadlines. You turned down Davos, Jake said flatly. You were invited to speak at the World Economic Forum, and you said no because you had work to do. It was the right priority decision. You're insane, Marcus said, but with a rather than criticism. You're absolutely insane. Do you know what I would give to speak at Davos? What anyone would give for that platform. I know what I'd have to give up, I replied. 3 days of implementation work. 3 days when we could be installing systems that catch diseases. The platform wasn't worth the cost. Mom sank into her chair, her phone displaying my Forbes cover. You're the youngest self-made female billionaire in healthcare. And you live in a 2-bedroom apartment. It's a nice apartment. Good light for working. Sarah, she said, her voice breaking, you could buy anything. Go anywhere. Do anything. And you choose to work 16-hour days from an apartment. Because the work matters more than the lifestyle. But don't you want? She gestured helplessly. Something? Recognition? Comfort? A life. I have a life. It just doesn't look like what you expected. Dad returned to the table, moving like an old man. I told you to get a real job. You have the most real job at this table. You're the only one doing anything that actually matters. Real estate matters, I said. Marketing matters. Consulting matters. Different work serves different purposes. Stop being generous, Marcus said roughly. We don't deserve your generosity. We deserve your anger. Your contempt. Something. I'm not angry. I'm just tired of explaining myself to people who've already decided not to listen. Uncle Tom spoke quietly. Are you going to keep coming to family dinners? I considered the question. Around the table my family waited, their faces showing various stages of shock, shame, and something that might have been hope. I don't know, I said honestly. These gatherings haven't been enjoyable for me. They've been endurance tests where I'm repeatedly told I'm failing at life while I'm actually saving lives. I'm not sure that's a dynamic worth maintaining. We'll change, Mom said quickly. We'll listen. We'll ask questions. You'll be awkward and overly interested and treat me like a stranger, I finished. Because that's what happens when you discover someone isn't who you thought they were. The relationship has to rebuild from scratch. Then we'll rebuild it, Dad said. If you'll let us. I looked at him, at all of them, seeing the genuine remorse and confusion. They meant well. They always had. Their cruelty hadn't been intentional. It had been the inevitable result of judging without understanding. Maybe, I said finally. But it has to be different. I won't come to dinners where I'm treated like a project or a problem. I won't explain myself over and over to people who've decided I'm a failure regardless of evidence. If we rebuild, it has to be as equals who respect each other's choices even when we don't understand them. Yes, Mom said immediately. Whatever you need. I don't need anything from you, I said gently. That's what I'm trying to explain. I don't need your approval or understanding or support. I have a life that works for me. I have work that matters. The question is whether you can accept that without trying to fix or change or mold me into something more comfortable for you. The room fell silent again, each person absorbed in their own reckoning. Jake spoke suddenly. The article says you're planning to open source parts of the diagnostic algorithm. That competing companies could use your work to develop their own systems. Next quarter, I confirmed. The basic diagnostic framework will be available under a Creative Commons license. Anyone can use it, improve it, build on it. You're giving away your competitive advantage, he said, stunned. I'm expanding the impact. If 10 companies use our framework to build diagnostic tools, that's 10 times more lives saved. Competition isn't the goal. Health outcomes are the goal. You really don't care about the money, Jennifer said wonderingly. The articles made it sound like PR spin, but you genuinely don't care about being a billionaire. I care about having resources to fund implementations. The personal wealth is incidental. Marcus laughed, a broken sound. Incidental. She calls being a billionaire incidental. It is, I insisted. If all the money disappeared tomorrow but the diagnostic systems kept running, I'd consider that a complete success. The wealth is a tool, not a goal. Dad was crying now, silent tears running down his face. I failed you. No, you didn't. You raised a daughter who got a Stanford MBA and used it to build something meaningful. That's not failure. I didn't support that building. I actively discouraged it. You didn't understand it. That's different from failure. Stop being so kind, he said roughly. I don't deserve your kindness. None of us do. Kindness isn't about deserving, I said. It's about choosing how to relate to people even when they've hurt you. The doorbell rang. Late arrivals for dessert, relatives who'd spent the day with other family branches. Uncle Chin, Grandma Morrison, Aunt Beatrice and her husband, 3 cousins I barely knew. They entered with the boisterous energy of people who hadn't participated in the earlier intervention, greeting everyone warmly, complimenting the decorations, commenting on the game. Grandma Morrison hugged me tight. Sarah, I saw you on the news last week. That CNBC interview about healthcare accessibility, magnificent work, darling. The room froze. You knew? Mom asked faintly. Of course I knew. Grandma looked around, confused by the strange energy. I've been following Sarah's company since she started it. Why do you think I invested in the Series A round? Another bomb dropping. You invested? Dad said. $2 million, Grandma said proudly. Best investment I ever made. Not because of the returns, though those have been excellent, but because I knew Sarah would do something important with it. She smiled at me. You've exceeded every expectation, darling. I tell everyone about my granddaughter who's revolutionizing medicine. Everyone. Mom repeated weakly. Everyone who'll listen. I'm quite insufferable about it at my bridge club. Grandma settled into her chair, oblivious to the tension. I assume you've all seen the Forbes cover? CEO of the Year at 34. Her grandfather would have been so proud. Uncle Chen, who'd been surveying the room with his usual sharp perception, spoke quietly. They didn't know, did they? Grandma's smile faded. Didn't know what? About any of it. Sarah's company. Her work. The Forbes cover. He looked at my parents. You thought she was unemployed. It wasn't a question. Oh, Grandma said, the single syllable heavy with disappointment. Oh, you didn't. You couldn't have been that foolish. We were, Dad said simply. We were exactly that foolish. Grandma looked at me, her expression softening with understanding. And you let us remain ignorant. They weren't interested in details, I said. So you worked in silence. Saved thousands of lives in silence. Built a company worth billions in silence. She shook her head. You're more patient than I would have been. Or more realistic about what people are willing to hear, I replied. The late arrivals caught up quickly through a combination of shocked revelations and phone searches. Within 10 minutes, everyone in the house was staring at screens showing various articles, interviews, and profiles of work I'd been doing while they'd assumed I was unemployed. Aunt Beatrice approached me hesitantly. Sarah, I told people you were still finding yourself. I meant it sympathetically, but now? It's fine, I said. It's not fine. You were finding yourself. You found yourself saving 10,000 lives per day, and I reduced it to a platitude for failure. The afternoon dissolved into awkward revelations and apologies. Some genuine, some performative, all uncomfortable. My family, both those who'd been there for dinner and those who arrived later, grappled with the disconnect between their assumptions and reality. As the gathering wound down and people prepared to leave, Mom found me in the kitchen where I was wrapping up leftover pie. Will you come to Christmas? She asked quietly. I don't know. I have implementation deadlines in Kenya and Bangladesh. The timing might not work. Sarah, please. Her voice cracked. I know we don't deserve another chance, but I'm asking for one anyway. Let us try to know the real you. I looked at her. This woman who'd raised me, supported me through Stanford, and then couldn't understand when I chose a path she didn't recognize. The real me, I said slowly, has been here all along. I never hid. I just stopped explaining when explanation became exhausting. If you want to know me, you can read the articles, watch the interviews, look at the work. It's all public. It always has been. But I want to hear it from you. You had 5 years to ask. The truth of that statement settled between us, undeniable and heavy. I know, she whispered. I know we wasted 5 years. But please don't let our foolishness waste more time. I want to know my daughter. The real daughter, not the version I constructed because I couldn't handle complexity. I sealed the pie container, considering. Maybe, I said finally. But you need to understand that my work comes first. Boys. If there's a choice between Christmas dinner and installing a diagnostic system that might catch a child's cancer 3 months earlier, I'm choosing the installation. I understand. Do you? I met her eyes. Because understanding that means accepting that I might miss holidays, birthdays, family events. It means accepting that I'm not going to prioritize family dinners over work that saves lives. Most people say they understand that, but they don't. They still expect me to choose them when it matters. Mom was quiet for a long moment. I want to say I understand. But honestly, I don't know if I do. I don't know if I can really grasp what you've built and what it requires. But I want to try. I want to learn. Even if I keep getting it wrong. That's more honest than most people manage, I acknowledged. She helped me load containers into my bag and we worked in silence for a few minutes before she spoke again. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. I should have been saying that for 5 years. But I was too busy being confused and disappointed by things that didn't matter. So I'm saying it now. I'm proud of you, Sarah. You're doing something extraordinary. Thank you, I said simply. As I left, saying abbreviated goodbyes to relatives who now looked at me like I was a stranger, I felt oddly lighter. The secret was out, not because I'd revealed it, but because circumstances had forced revelation. They knew now. They couldn't unknow it. Whether that knowledge would improve our relationship or make it more complicated remained to be seen. But at least I wouldn't have to sit through another dinner listening to career advice from people who thought I was unemployed. That, at least, was something. I drove home through quiet streets, my phone buzzing with messages from relatives. Some apologetic, some congratulatory, some still processing. I'd answer them eventually with the same patience I'd shown at dinner. But for now I had work. Always work. The Kenya implementation needed final testing. The Bangladesh training protocols required review. The open source framework needed documentation before next quarter's release. Somewhere in the world, a diagnostic system I designed was analyzing patient data, searching for the subtle patterns that indicated disease. It would work through the night, tireless and precise, catching conditions that human eyes might miss. 10,000 lives per day, the article said. 10,000 people who would get diagnoses earlier, treatment sooner, better outcomes. That was worth missing Thanksgiving dinner. It was worth 5 years of family misunderstanding. It was worth the Forbes cover and the awkward revelations and all the complicated relationship repairs that would come next. The work was worth it. It always had been.